Hey, what's up, everybody? We are back again, and today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different from what I usually cover on this channel. Because instead of talking about a rapper like I usually do, today we're going to be talking about another YouTuber. And that YouTuber in question is, of course, the internet's busiest music nerd himself, Anthony Fantano. Now, if you're not already somewhat aware of this guy, I would honestly be kind of surprised, considering the fact that if you're already watching the content on this channel, it means you're pretty into music and underground rap. And Anthony's a much bigger voice in that space than I am, but despite that, he's also a lot more controversial. Well, for now at least. But anyways, I will give you guys a bit of a brief description on how exactly he rose to fame, who he is, and what type of content he makes. So as implied before, he's the internet's busiest music nerd, and that basically means that he's a music reviewer. Apparently, he was actually doing music reviews before YouTube was even a thing, and then once it became popular, he would transition over to the internet. And during this period when he first got online, written reviews were a lot more important than they are nowadays, with first of all, print media still being somewhat of a relevant format, as well as websites like Pitchfork being heavily respected at the time. However, as the years went on, they would slowly begin to lose relevancy before basically fading away altogether, and a big chunk of the reason why was because of people like Fantano, as he was one of the first to really start doing video music reviews. I mean, don't get me wrong, people have been reviewing music ever since the conception of music itself, but the way that Anthony did it was pretty unique at the time, as he would get on camera, show his face, give his actual opinions from his mouth, which I know sounds pretty generic nowadays, but back then it wasn't. All of these written reviews came from random faceless people who worked at the company, and while yes, they would put their name at the top of the article, so you could technically follow them from review to review, for the most part, nobody really knew who was behind these. However, if you went over to YouTube and checked out the Needle Drop, which is the channel that Anthony runs, then you'd be able to see the same opinion from the same guy, the same friendly face, and eventually you get connected to him just as much as you get connected to the reviews that he's putting out. And this sense of familiarity definitely helped him out a lot, because you're more likely to take a musical review from somebody that you trust and like than some random guy on the side of the street telling you that A Love Letter to You 4 is Trippie Redd's best album of all time, which it is, but that homeless guy, I'm not taking him seriously. But I hear you asking, what made Anthony so special? I mean, there was probably a ton of people who were doing the same sort of format back then. What made him stand out? Well, it was because he went above and beyond. I mean, anybody can turn on a camera and talk into it for 10 minutes, but Anthony actually had quite a bit of production value even early on, and on top of that, he also would play into a lot of that early YouTube energy. Meaning he would interject a lot of skits into his reviews, he had a bunch of different characters that he would play, he was actually funny, and he would add a lot of humor to them as well. And this took him from some boring generic music reviewer to somebody who really had a personality that people could attach onto. However, seeing as how this was the early internet and things were a lot more lax back then, with people not taking everything so goddamn seriously, Anthony had a lot of room to really branch out creatively, and he would definitely take advantage of the culture of the internet at the time by playing into several different memes that people would make about him, dabbling with a bit of edgy humor from time to time, and eventually creating an entire second channel where he would do more satirical reviews, which honestly only made him more popular. Because unlike a lot of other music reviewers who take themselves way too seriously and can never be the butt of the joke, Anthony was actually willing to make fun of himself, and because of that, he would only become more endearing to his audience. However, as time went on, his meme channel would grow more and more popular, with it eventually cultivating an entirely different audience than his main channel, with a much more edgy audience than what people would probably assume. On top of that, he also had Sam Hyde on there one time for an interview, and if you know anything about him, he's very controversial for several different reasons. And while I would argue none of the content that he was making over there was political in any way, as the internet continued to grow and started to splinter off into different factions with different political beliefs, eventually Fantano became a target. As like I mentioned previously, what he was doing on YouTube was making these written articles more and more irrelevant, and because of that, eventually the old media would fight back. With one site in particular going by the name of Fader putting out a hit piece article about him, basically calling him alt-right, saying that he cultivated an audience of a bunch of dangerous people, that he had affiliations with Sam Hyde, and Sam Hyde is a Nazi apparently, so that makes Anthony a Nazi by association. They basically tried to dig up anything they could to make him look bad, with hopes that his mainstream audience would turn on him and try to cancel him, leaving him as a fringe internet celebrity that wouldn't really get any mainstream attention again. Which is kind of silly considering the fact that even if they had succeeded and Fantano had been canceled by his own audience, there would have been other music reviewers that would have popped up on YouTube and became popular. At this point, written music reviews were becoming a dying medium, and doing this would really only push off the inevitable. And while in retrospect, this doesn't really seem like all that big of a deal, as in the modern day, basically every big internet personality has multiple articles written about them every single week. Back in the day, it was a lot more rare for mainstream media to talk about internet personalities, and because of that, this could have actually ended up hurting Anthony in his career, with multiple sponsors dropping him if it ended up getting enough heat. However, at the time, Anthony actually handled it pretty well, with him putting out a response video where he went into surgical detail about all the points made about him and basically debunked all of the arguments that they made. On top of that, he would also file a lawsuit against them, which I know nowadays comes off as kind of a pussy move. I mean, you can't take criticism, you gotta sue everybody who comes out against you. But you gotta keep in mind that this was a mainstream article written about him and not another random YouTuber. And while people use the word slander way too much nowadays for basically any criticism that hurts their feelings, I would say that this article really did classify as slander, considering the fact that he actually lost a lot of opportunities because of it, and most of what was said wasn't actually true. As the real meaning behind slander is when you intentionally lie about somebody with hopes of hurting their reputation and losing them opportunities, which is really hard to prove when you're a public figure. But despite that, it seems like Anthony actually ended up winning that lawsuit. The article was taken down, and because of that, a lot of people respected him more than they did before. He didn't back down, he didn't cower away from the might of the mainstream media, even though at this point he was probably a lot more relevant than them. But either way, he was willing to stand his ground, and because of that, he got a lot of respect. However, there was one downside to all of this, and that's when he ended up taking down his second channel, as at this point it probably wasn't worth the headache, and while he was able to fight back against Fader, eventually this channel was probably going to get him into trouble one way or another. It was inevitable. And while removing this channel definitely pissed off a pretty big chunk of his audience at the time, as they saw it as him selling out and trying to go mainstream, I would argue this was definitely the right choice, as at the time the internet was really starting to shift away from that more edgy humor, and while you don't have to completely change all of your content to appeal to a more mass audience, I think it's kind of silly to be upset at him for doing this, because while I definitely understand that if you grew up with this content, it's probably sad to see it go, and while it's sad that it wasn't archived in some capacity, it makes sense that he wouldn't want to continue to make this type of content. I mean, are you really going to leave thousands of dollars on the table because you want to continue to make edgy jokes? I think a lot of people on the internet like to pretend like they're all about free speech and that if they were in that situation, they would never back down. But if you were given the opportunity to make thousands and thousands of dollars and all you had to do was stop saying the N-word, I would imagine that you would probably stop saying the N-word. And this kind of plays into a bigger issue that I see on the internet nowadays, where you have a pretty good chunk of people complaining that YouTube is worse than it's ever been before. Everybody's making slop content, everything's too sanitized, and you can't find anything real anymore. Everybody's a grifter and they're only trying to make money, as if everybody in 2016 wasn't also trying to make money. Kind of a side tangent here, but I'm really tired of seeing people make those videos complaining about slop content. You realize when you make a video like that where you regurgitate all the same talking points from everybody else who's made a video like that, you're kind of making slop content yourself. Also, I don't know why people always try to use Leafy as an example of what a good YouTuber was. I mean, the guy literally made videos where he played CSGO Surf and talked about random bullshit. If that's not slop content, I don't know what it is. But anyways, getting back on topic, all of this drama would go down between Anthony and Fader in 2017, and while at the time he definitely was pretty big, he would of course only grow in relevancy as the years went on. I really only became aware of him in 2018 when he would hop on the bandwagon and shitting on Soundcloud SoundCloud rappers who at the time were seen as very easy targets. And I'm not talking about people making videos making fun of people like Jumix or Icy Narco or Kid Boo, people who are basically universally seen as jokes. At the time, people were making fun of all the mainstream SoundCloud guys. I remember seeing a review of somebody saying that Juice WRLD was a misogynist for rapping about what he rapped about. People were making fun of XXXTentacion for his charges. Of course, Lil Pump was a meme online with everybody making fun of how dumbed down and stupid his music was. And among this never-ending sea of generic music reviewers shitting on the same old topic over and over again, Anthony would once again kind of stand out. Although not for the reasons that you would probably think. He was definitely still shitting on the SoundCloud Wave, but it seems like he was trying to intentionally go against the grain by defending people like Lil Pump while also shitting on people like Lil Peep, with that review in general being particularly egregious. But at the same time, I mean, it's his musical opinion. He definitely does do it to piss people off, but at the same time, who really gives a fuck? I've never really understood why people get so worked up about his opinions on music. I mean, I get it. If you love that type of music, it hurts to hear somebody talking bad about it, but why do you continually seek out his reviews when you know that that's what he's gonna do? Bro is a professional rage baiter, and I guess he's good at it because he's managed to grow a massive channel and is now one of the most popular faces on YouTube in general. However, as time goes on, you could really start to see a shift in him where he no longer seemed to be particularly interested in the music and instead would start inserting his political views constantly. And while that is understandable in some situations, as of course certain artists make overtly political albums and when talking about them you kind of have to dive into those topics, he would start to insert his political opinions into albums that really had nothing to do with politics whatsoever. I remember one review in particular where he was talking about Jack Harlow's album Jackman and how on one of the songs he was talking about how he had white fans and white fans make up a pretty big majority of who listens to hip hop. And Anthony would go into this weird little tirade about systemic racism and class issues and how sometimes black people live in poor neighborhoods so they can't afford concert tickets. And it's like, I get the point that you're trying to make, but we're talking about Jack Harlow here. He's a glorified frat boy who makes music about having vanilla sex. I don't think anybody's really trying to hear his opinion on all of that. You're expecting a little bit too much from him, but I guess in Anthony's mind, everything kind of runs through that political lens, so he's not able to detach music from his own worldview. On top of that, he would become really active on Twitter, which as any normal functioning person knows is not good for your mental health, as basically all of the scum of humanity is on that website. If you spend day in and day out on Twitter, you're probably going to have a pretty warped worldview where you see everything is black or white, as there's really no room for nuance on there. And while Anthony would probably make the argument that people really started to dislike him after he deleted his second channel and was no longer appealing to the quote-unquote alt-right, I really think it's when he started to get active on Twitter that a lot of people turned against him. I mean, you're the funny bald music man. We want to hear you talk about music. We don't really want to hear you talk about the Holocaust. That's not a very fun topic, Anthony. But of course, just like any other addiction, once you get that quick hit of dopamine from tweeting out something that gets people riled up, it's hard to stop. You're going to want that feeling over and over and over again. And as time went on, Anthony would slowly become everything that he once fought against. He was no longer an icon of counterculture and was now basically doing everything that the mainstream media was doing back in 2017. It was no longer about creative expression, and instead it was about wagging the finger at everybody that he personally disagrees with. And while personally I don't really give too much of a fuck about that, as like I said, I never was a huge fan of Anthony, and basically every big mainstream YouTuber is completely politically brain rotted and seems to either fall into one camp or the other. But where I really start to take notice, and the whole reason that I wanted to talk about this in the first place, is because Anthony would take things a step further. Because of course, while everybody on Twitter is constantly throwing mud at each other and trying to dig into people's past to find anything that makes them look bad, where I feel that it goes too far is when you start openly accusing people of being I get that everything is team sports nowadays and all is fair in love and war and blah blah blah, but in my opinion, I think topics like that should be handled a lot more carefully and shouldn't be used as ammo to get back at somebody in a beef. And yes, of course, I'm talking about the academic situation. Now, the last time that I talked about this in my Brandon Buckingham video, a lot of people in the comments seemed to probably intentionally not understand the point that I was trying to make. If you're not aware of the situation, DJ Academics, who who is a pretty big voice in hip hop culture and is known for having some pretty controversial takes, as well as having a lot of beef with a lot of different rappers, ended up getting on a live stream with a 15-year-old boy and saying a lot of really weird shit to him. And while of course this is weirdo behavior and definitely should be called out, I felt like the way that many people went about it was super weird. People like Brandon Buckingham, and more importantly for the context of this video, Anthony Fantano, were almost taking glee in the fact that academics did this. Instead of being grossed out by it and calling him out on a moral level, they were taking joy in the fact that he finally fucked up and they now had a point against him. And I get it, if you hate the dude, you're gonna want to drag up dirt on him, but I don't think that you should use as a point against somebody, no matter how much you hate them. It really comes across as fake moral outrage, where apparently they were so offended for the kid and it was really embarrassing for him to have to be in that situation with academics, while also constantly putting clips of the interaction in all of their videos and showing his face. And I understand, in internet blood sports, people don't really think about the ramifications of these situations. It's simply a bullet point that you can use. And if those are the rules that you're going to play by, I guess that's perfectly fine. Personally, I don't really agree with it, but if that's the way that you're going to operate, that's the way that you're going to operate. But on the same hand, you can't be offended when somebody does the same to you. And that finally leads us to the main topic of today's video, almost 15 minutes in. Wow, I'm really great at this. Anthony Fantano saying the N-word. Not only saying the N-word, but saying N-word with the hard ER and then saying the F slur too.
Who infamously called Ian a nigger.
Yeah, apparently 10 years ago, he was on some sort of podcast and he ended up referencing the infamous tagline of iDubbbz, which of course is N slur, F slur. Nipple fallopian tube for those who are a little bit more inclined, am I right, boys? And of course, academics would end up finding this clip and sharing it on Twitter to try to get a point against Anthony. And well, it really seemed to work. As after all, Anthony had cultivated an audience of people who are really concerned about something like this. And I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't be. I mean, personally, it has nothing to do with me. I'm not black and I'm not gay, so I'm not gonna get offended on anybody else's account. Also, sorry, Burn Kaz and 83 Hades. Yeah, I don't swing that way. I know it's going to be disappointing for you, but hey guys, it's okay. You'll get them on the next one. But anyways, I'll leave the argument about the word itself for Twitter, but right here, I'm more so talking about the hypocritical nature of all of it. Because of course, his fans are going to come out and say, he said that over 10 years ago, it's old news, he's changed, he's matured, he's evolved. It was a different time on the internet, that was more acceptable back then. And while I agree with all of that, the thing is, if somebody else was getting in trouble for the same thing, Anthony wouldn't give them any sort of leniency. So in my opinion, he should be held to the same standards that he holds everybody else to. And to make matters even worse for him, there was also another clip that came out where he was seen making fun of Trayvon Martin, who, if you don't know, that was a kid who ended up getting murdered by police officers. However, this clip was out of context and it was actually another person on the podcast who was making fun of him, with Anthony immediately calling it out. So I would say at this point the clip's pretty irrelevant. It doesn't prove that he's a racist. However, despite that one being debunked, the first clip was definitely making its rounds on Twitter, and Anthony of course had no choice but to make a response. And of course, seeing how well he responded to all of the Fader backlash back in the day, we know that Anthony's going to come out with a pretty solid response. But overall, I would say, kind of half and half. I mean, he definitely did a good job at debunking some of the arguments, but at the same time, throughout the entire video, he has this really smarmy, holier-than-thou tone that he never really drops.
Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and in case you haven't noticed, I'm getting torn apart on Twitter, which is nothing new for me personally, but the discourse seems to have reached a fever pitch that's making a lot of people concerned and angry and even thinking I'm covertly a racist, bigoted person.
If this video is supposed to be an apology, I would think you'd be a bit more apologetic, but throughout the entire thing, he just seems really pissed off. He's constantly deflecting, talking about how the people who are accusing him of these things are actually bad people and he's the good guy.
I would also like to be spared the headache of just some freak trying to frame me disingenuously disingenuously and make it seem like I'm okay with a child being killed by a racist vigilante, which is where the most truly aggravating thing about this whole situation comes up.
It's like the guy can't even turn off his Twitter brain for 10 minutes and make a simple video where he explains the situation, apologizes to the people who need to be apologized to, and then moves on. He has to use it as an opportunity to dig at the opposition. And while I understand that all the arguments being made about him are pretty bad faith and they're using clips that are cut pretty out of context to try to take digs at him, I think if you actually want to apologize, you probably should apologize. Personally, if it was me, I probably wouldn't, because after all, apologizing on the internet usually only gets you into more trouble. But with the type of audience that he really has no choice, because they're going to eat him alive if he doesn't make a response. But that's the thing about Anthony. He's not thinking about YouTube. He's not thinking about his perception on there. What he's concerned about is Twitter. Twitter is his life. Twitter is his main platform. Even though he found all of his fame and success on YouTube, it's not as important as Twitter. And you see this happen with a lot of YouTubers where they become very concerned about their public opinion on sites like Reddit, Twitter, Instagram. And while I definitely understand that it can be stressful when everybody online is talking about you constantly and saying things that aren't true and hurting your reputation, at a certain point, once you get big enough, you just have to expect that people are constantly going to be talking about you negatively. And I would say only about 10% of that negative feedback is actually worth anything. Not to sound corny or anything, but most people who are leaving negative comments on your shit are pretty miserable people themselves, and they don't actually want to see you get better and thrive. They just want you to do what makes them happy and fuck everything else. I mean, I've dealt with this to some degree. I've been doxxed multiple times. I've had people stalk me in real life. I've had false allegations made up about me with a bunch of people trying to speculate about my personal life. But even after dealing with all of that, I do have to admit I only have 30,000 subscribers. I'm not that big of a YouTuber, so I can't really speak on what it would feel like to have that level of backlash that somebody with 1 million subscribers probably gets on a day-to-day basis. But despite that, if you're gonna be a big YouTuber, you're gonna have to have thick skin. You're gonna have to ignore most of the discourse about you online unless it's actually relevant or slanderous in some sort of way. The internet has become a more negative place than ever before. There's a lot of really unhappy people out there who have absolutely no control over their lives, so they try to get online and feel powerful. And people like that, you gotta try your best to ignore. But with all of that said, I want to come to my final point about Anthony and this entire situation. And my final conclusion is really just be consistent. I've always had a rule with myself on YouTube and in my personal life that I never try to hold people to a higher standard than I hold myself. I'm not gonna get mad at somebody for saying the N-word, because of course, oh my god, shocking, I know. I'm not going to get mad at people for making edgy jokes. I'm not going to get mad at people for saying things that aren't culturally acceptable, because at the end of the day, everybody has said that type of shit in their own personal life. Nobody's perfect, nobody's special. And if I was to start trying to tear people down for doing stuff like that, I would be a hypocrite. I've had many people come to me before and try to get me to make videos on people who have said the N-word, and honestly, I don't really care. It's not my place to get upset about. However, when it comes to people being creeps, that is something that I can call them out for, because in my own life, I haven't done shit like that before. People are always talking about fighting your own demons. I don't got demons that look like your guys' demons, I'm sorry. But with that said, do I actually think Anthony is racist, and do I think this will affect him in the long term? Well, no and no. Is Anthony racist? Well, probably not in the conventional sense. I don't think he hates black people. I don't think he said it because he has any hate in his heart, although I definitely do think that he has a white savior complex and he feels like he needs to save black people in a lot of situations. However, that's pretty regular nowadays. A lot of people have that mentality, so I'm not going to specifically call out Anthony for being that way. And second of all, do I think he's going to get canceled and have his entire career torn down over this? Absolutely not. As long as people are politically aligned with you, you'll overlook a lot of shit, and I think his fan base is willing to overlook this situation if it means that he can continue to fight back against the people on the other side. I'm sure people are going to continue to haunt him with this clip for years to come, but eventually it will be used so many different times that people won't care anymore, and well, Anthony will probably survive. Although admittedly, he's probably not really going to be able to operate the same way that he's been operating for the past couple years, because now if he tries to morally grandstand on anybody, they're probably going to bring up this clip, so maybe he'll be a little bit less terminally online in Twitter brain, but Probably not. But yeah, with all that said, that's my opinion on Anthony Fantano. Don't worry, I'm not going to become a commentary slop channel. I just thought this topic was kind of interesting because it's within the wheelhouse of what I usually talk about. And all the other music commentary channels who were talking about this were playing the safe game where they didn't really want to say anything all that controversial. So I thought I'd bring my own opinion, even though by the time this video comes out, the entire drama is probably going to be over. And that's the main reason that I don't do topical videos like this, because I'm a one-man team. I record and edit all on my own. It takes me a while to do that, and because of that, I'm usually late to the party. But whatever, still gonna do the video, still gonna put it out. If you liked the video and agree with my points, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Knife Gang, delete this gang, shout out all of you. If you didn't agree, well, you're probably already leaving a negative comment, so I don't gotta tell you to do so. Leave a burger emoji if you made it to the end of the video, and with all of that said, we will be back again next time. Peace out, bye.